Hello, this is Boyd Stevenson. I'm ATA's Director of Hazardous Materials Policy as well as Commercial Driver Licensing. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to make it up there in person, but I'm happy that Brian and I were able to work together to make sure that you all were able to get this presentation at least through PowerPoint and audio recording. If anyone does have questions, my contact information is at the end of the presentation, and I'm happy to speak with any member of Maine Motor Truck. Going ahead and flipping to the next slide, we're going to cover three things today. First, a quick walkthrough of the driver shortage facts. Then we'll kind of talk about some of the solutions that carriers have looked at. Unfortunately, that's going to be brief because a lot of those solutions have been pay-based, and for better or for worse, we can't really talk about those things without getting into antitrust concerns. Finally, we're going to talk about three things that ATA is doing, sort of to try to either increase the pool of people that can be part of the industry or an attempt to make it easier to just get into the industry. Next slide, please. This is the driver shortage facts. Next slide. So we're going to move through these pretty quickly, but the first question here is, does your company currently have difficulty finding qualified drivers? And all of these are from ATA's driver survey, driver hiring survey from September of last year. So the thing I will tell you about this is these numbers are stark and they are dire. What we are hearing anecdotally and through some of our more ad hoc collections is that they are also getting worse. Here, the thing that's obvious to note is that everyone is having problems with the exception of private carriers, and even the majority of them are. Next slide, please. This one doesn't make we don't have to spend a lot of time on it. The first is to note that there's enough people applying, they're just not quality drivers. I will draw your attention to some text down there at the bottom that says it's common to hear that fleets take less than 10% of applicants. Next slide, please. This is just to go into about how many truck drivers there are out there that we might need in the industry. And as you work down, you'll see we've got over 10 million CDL holders, but there are a lot of folks that have CDLs that don't drive tractor trailers. Those are going to be your bus, your motor coach, your van, and some of your hazmat drivers that may just be driving a regular car but require a Class C. Then we've got 2.5 to 3 million trucks on the road, but of those, only 1.4 million are actual tractor trailers. And then of those, only about 800,000 are used in long-haul operations. Moving on to the next slide, you can see ATA's turnover rates for both large and small truckload carriers going back to 2005. Things did drop down considerably during the recession, but you'll note that even then the numbers for large truckload carriers were approaching 50%. Since 2012, we've been above 100% turnover rates in the large TL sector. That's not something that we expect to change in the near future. Next slide just quantifies the driver shortage. As you can see, the number right now is about 50,000 drivers that our industry is short. We expect to see that number rise to over 200,000 by the middle of the next decade. Next slide. This just goes to the average number of new drivers needed per year. Our economics department estimates that at about 96,000. The thing that you'll notice here is that a lot of these departures we're looking at related to industry growth and retirements aren't something that there's a lot of control over that a carrier can exercise. So this is really an issue where we have to create a playing field where more drivers can come into the industry. Next slide. This really is just looking at how many carriers talked about possibly raising pay for drivers in 2013. The thing I will note about this slide is that if you hearken back to the earlier slide that talked about having trouble finding quality drivers, things line up pretty carefully. The private carrier numbers are a lot closer between the two, but there's still a fairly good correlation between all groups. Next slide, please. This is looking at the average annual pay. One of the things that we can note is that from what we get from our surveys as well as the Bureau of Labor Statistics at the Labor Department, is that driver wages have not kept up with inflation. since the year 2000. All in all, you can see that had we held 2000 wages steady, driver wages would be around $53,000, and all in all, it's about a 6% drop in real wages. It's a little over 6 actually, and that's obviously going to be something that we'll talk about this later on when we get to the construction industry, but may lure drivers to somewhere else. Next slide. This just relates to utilization, which really goes less to drivers and more to efficiency in utilizing drivers. The important thing to look here is that really since about 2009, those numbers have been remarkably steady, and they have been falling since the much better numbers in 2007. Next slide. Here you've got, and these are year-to-date numbers through the end of July of this year. We're talking about getting rid of tractors. You can see that a lot of fleets have been retiring tractors. That's really, really surprising. Just on Monday, Bob Costello, ATA's chief economist, spoke at our management conference and exhibition and noted that demand for freight transportation is only expected to rise right now. So it's very surprising that we see carriers retiring tractors. The fact of the matter is, though, they can't put people in them. Next slide, please. This one we're not going to spend a lot of time on, except to note that you can see that the issues exist with independent contractors as well as employee drivers. Next slide. We talked about this a little earlier. The construction industry is a large competitor with the trucking industry as far as driver labor is concerned. We can see that when the construction industry was really hit in the middle part of the last decade, or the end of the last decade, we saw that our turnover rates went down significantly. You can see now that these numbers are a lot better in 2013 and 2014 and the expected 2015 numbers, both for housing starts and construction employment. Those have to come from somewhere, and very possibly from us. Now I'd like to talk a little bit related to exactly how carriers are dealing with this problem. We've just got 3 quotes up here in this section. Spend a little bit on each one so that you've got some opportunity to read. You can see we've got comments from CRST, from Maverick Truck Lines, and from Melton Truck Lines. And I'll just give you all a few moments to flip through those and just stick on the Melton Truck Lines slide. One of the things that we'll talk about is that the problem does go beyond pay. We've also got an aging population. The average driver age is approaching 50 years. Micromanagement and regulation, that's something that we expect to see rise with the ELD mandate. A lot of drivers join the industry because they enjoyed the freedom of the long-haul lifestyle. And the fact of the matter is, you don't necessarily get that in today's regulated industry. Here are a couple examples that I've pulled from the news so that I can talk about them that are sort of non-price ways. Conway Trucking on October 1st of this year did announce that they are now offering a $4,000 per driver CDL school reimbursement. What they're going to do is they're going to pay off sections of whatever the student owes over 12 periods, and on the 12th period, if they haven't, they'll just pay the lump of it into up to $4,000. Rail transport has changed their pay scale. There's an article about it I encourage you all to take a look at. But they're accounting in addition for drivers' miles with their productivity, on-time deliveries, roadside inspection results, whether or not they have extra credentials on their CDL, are they saving preventable costs such as avoiding accidents, and what's their fuel efficiency looking at. And by this, they're able to sort of incentivize their drivers to provide efficiencies to the company that they then pass some back to the driver. The last thing, if you will flip to the next slide, which is expand the recruiting pool, is in fact that. And one of the things we've seen recently is a large influx of women into the industry as drivers. Um, Ellen Voy of Women in Trucking noted that one of the difficulties our industry has is that everyone wants their kids to go to college and not get their hands dirty. And that's a bit of a challenge for us because age is always going to be an issue. Um, most companies don't want to hire drivers that are under 25 years old. A lot of companies can't take drivers that are under 23 because their insurance policies effectively require them to take a driver who has had 2 years experience on the road. And of course, you can't drive in interstate commerce unless you have at least, or unless you are at least 21 years old. This is difficult because most folks that go into blue collar work directly out of high school start working when they're 18. You can't join our industry until you're 21 years old, which effectively means that we are asking people to sit out of the labor force for 3 years or to sit in the labor force for 3 years and then make a change. The fact of the matter is, most of them have already made a decision about what they want to do at that point in time.